Many have pointed out the fact that he's there to repair damage rather than catching up with old friends. So I'm just going to put it out there. Let me start with Professor Batarfi in Saudi Arabia first. How strained is the relationship, do you think, that among the long-term allies?
I don't think it is too bad to the extent that they can't provide what we need, because in the past we need them to provide us with security. Now we can take in our own hands our own security, and we have Arab and Islamic alliances to support us further. All we need from the Americans is just to honor their agreements with us regarding the delivery of weapons and their role in protecting the shipping lines in the Gulf and elsewhere.
All right.
Other than that, thank you very much. They did well in the past, and now we can take our own responsibility in our own shoulders.
Let me put that question to Dr. Clawson, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. Do you agree with what's being said there, Doctor? That, Professor Batarfi just mentioned that the relationship between Washington and Riyadh isn't that bad. Is that your assessment as well?
Both U.S. President Obama and Saudi King Salman seem comfortable with a more distant relationship than what existed in the period from 1990 to 2010. That 20-year period was really a period that's an exception in the 70-year history of U.S.-Saudi relations, in that for those 20 years the two sides worked together much more closely than they have at other times. The norm in the U.S.-Saudi relationship over the last 70 years has been cooperation on some issues, disagreement on others, general strategic common perspective, but not the kind of close cooperation that we saw, especially in the 1990s.
So what's your assessment of U.S. position on Iran and Saudi Arabia, the two major powerhouses in the region?
Well, my understanding is that there is increasing concern in the United States about the future of Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have overextended themselves in a number of areas, and perhaps the worst case is in Yemen, where the Saudis launched a war against the country, and they failed after bombing the country for over a year and destroying the country's infrastructure. And despite the fact that the United States gave the Saudis weapons and are involved in the attacks on the country, the Saudis have been completely defeated. And the money that the Saudis are spending is now causing great difficulty. There's speculation that the Saudi riyal will fall from its current stage, and the link between the riyal and the dollar cannot be sustained. So the Iranians feel that Saudi Arabia is heading towards a rather uncertain period, and the United States, it seems from Tehran, really doesn't know what to do about it.
I'm going to ask Professor Batarfi to respond to what's been said here. It looks like the two countries are locked in a proxy struggle in the region. What do you make of what's been said there?
In the summit, the Islamic summit in Istanbul, it was clear that the whole Muslim nation is condemning Iran's intervention in its neighbors' affairs and its sponsorship of terrorism. That was said clearly, and all the countries, including Tehran's allies in Iraq and Lebanon, have signed on in this. I can't see more isolation and failure than this statement.
In that closed-door meeting, it's also reported that President Obama reiterated his stance that Saudi Arabia and other Persian Gulf nations needed to rely less on Washington for security, according to officials. Why does the United States want this? I mean, what will it mean to the region?
Well, President Obama in particular is interested in seeing the United States reduce its security presence in the Persian Gulf and instead pivot to Asia, the phrase that he likes to use. That's going to be a difficult task because the Persian Gulf remains a very unstable region. Iran continues to provide arms, contrary to Security Council resolutions, to the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Iran continues to provide arms, again, contrary to Security Council resolutions, to the government in Syria. And Iranian provided arms have been found in several of the Gulf monarchies. So it's an unstable region. It's going to be hard for the United States to reduce its presence. But President Obama is urging Gulf countries to continue their very considerable efforts to improve their militaries.
And Professor Marandi, what do you make of the meeting between the two? I mean, do you think that some of the thorny issues were put to rest during this meeting, or not so much?
Well, to be blunt, it really doesn't make too much of a difference. The United States is stuck in a very bad marriage with the Saudi regime. Saudi Arabia exports Wahhabism and the extremism that we're seeing across the board in Asia and in Africa, as well as the terrorist attacks. They all stem from groups that follow the Wahhabi religion. German intelligence recently gave a statement to the media saying that Saudi Arabia is becoming the biggest threat to the Arab world. And the Saudis are funding extremists in Syria. In fact, 2 days ago, there were 2 suicide attacks in the north of Syria near the Turkish border. One of them was carried out by a Saudi national from Al-Qaeda, and the other from a Chinese national who is Wahhabi and affiliated to Al-Qaeda. So this is the extent of damage that we're seeing coming from Saudi Arabia. Now, the United States can continue with this alliance and allow the Saudis to pursue this policy, but this will only create more devastation across the region and greater terrorism in Europe itself. But I think ultimately the greatest concern that Iran has is that Saudi Arabia is creating a monster that it can no longer control, and ultimately extremists like Al-Qaeda and ISIL will turn against the regime itself and bring that down. The price of oil is collapsing. The Saudis are funding multiple wars. The royal family is spending a lot of money on themselves. This cannot last forever.
And with the various security concerns in sight, like you just mentioned, Saudi Arabia has also been keen looking forward. So I want to play this first to our viewers, showing a growing willingness to use direct force. Last year, its military spending grew to $87.2 billion, making the country the world's 3rd highest military spender. And last month, they opened a new arms factory. It has proposed building a military base as well in Djibouti on the Horn of Africa to project power abroad. Dr. Clawson, how do you understand this growing ambition of Middle East power? Does it have the strategic stability or capability to match its new ambitions?
The Saudis are projecting power only in their immediate neighborhood, in countries like Yemen, with which they share a long history and a long border, and in countries like Syria, which are very close to them. So the Saudis are trying to have some forward defense by countering Iran's aggressive destabilization of regional governments and by Iran's support for the brutal slaughter of innocent civilians, such as the 250,000 civilians that have died at the hands of the Assad regime. That slaughter of 250,000 civilians, which is the worst fighting that we see in the world today, is something which would not be going on if it were not for the Iranian support for the Assad.
May I make a point
regime.
here?
Sure. Go ahead, Professor Marandi.
Well, I think your guest in the United States knows quite well that almost half of the people who were killed during the Syrian military conflict were actually from the Syrian army. And the United States is the country that is illegally funding extremist organizations directly and indirectly with weapons. And it's recently been reported.
Actually,
that
that's not something I know, because it's not true. None of that is true. 80% of the casualties are civilians.
The United States and its allies.
Well, he was interrupting me, and I don't
You
appreciate
should
being
calm
interrupted
down.
by him.
I think the
I don't appreciate being interrupted by him,
No,
and I
she
don't
asked
appreciate you
me-
letting him
she
tell
told
those
me
things.
to speak. So
Let Professor Marandi
I don't
finish his
appreciate
point.
being interrupted.
I agree.
I don't
May I
appreciate being
continue?
interrupted.
All right,
May
go
I
ahead
continue?
with
No, you may not.
Go ahead with your
no,
point,
I may not.
Dr. Clawson.
Yes, thank you for stopping that interruption. The international human rights observers, which have shown that 80% of the casualties in Syria are caused by the Assad regime and its supporters, and the Iranian regime, which has continued to defy Security Council resolutions by exporting arms to Iran, and this has been the source of the 6 million refugees who've left Syria, and has been the source of the more than 1 million people who've gone into Europe, destabilizing the entire region. So Iran likes to claim that it is somehow the victim of terrorism, when Iran is the principal source of the sectarian terrorism which is disturbing this region. And Iran continues to live in a parallel universe in which it denies the reality which is accepted by all of the Islamic countries, as your guest from Riyadh noted, and to insist that its version of reality is true, when in fact it has no support from the countries in the region or the Islamic countries for its version of what it claims is truth.
I think it's quite obvious that the Americans, what they've done in Syria, and they've committed crimes against humanity. They've broken international law by funding terrorist and extremist organizations alongside Turkey and Saudi Arabia. We know, for example, the Turkish trade with ISIL was going on for a very long time until the Russians actually bombed the trucks that were carrying the trade. The United States supported Saudi Arabia in its devastation of Yemen, and this is a crime against humanity that the United States government has to answer for. Wahhabism is the ideology that blew up the bombs and carried out suicide attacks in Brussels and France. We all know this. And the United States, as long as it wants to close its eyes to this reality, it is actually living in a parallel universe itself. The Deputy Chancellor of Germany acknowledges the Saudi role. The intelligence of Germany, intelligence sources in Germany gave to the media statements about the Saudi role in the media. It's nothing that one can deny. Al-Qaeda, we know that Al-Qaeda was created in Afghanistan and Pakistan as a result of the export of extremist ideology in those countries. We see the same thing now happening in Libya, thanks to NATO's devastation of the country. If the United States wants to open up its eyes to reality, there is a way forward. If Saudi Arabia wants to stop exporting this extremism, there is a way forward. In the case of Syria, Iran advocates international observers going into the country and holding free and fair elections. The Americans and the Saudis don't want this because they know that they probably will not get the results that they've been talking about for so long.
We've got to go,
Peace in Yemen
Professor
also
Marandi.
it can only come about if the Americans stop giving arms to the Saudis.
All
Thank
right.
you.
We'll leave it there. Thank you all. Professor Marandi joining us from Tehran, Professor Batarfi joining us from Jeddah, and also Dr. Clawson joining us from Washington, D.C. Appreciate your insights.